and gentlemen, and welcome to the Liverpool Catholic Club. My name is Michael Andjelkovic, and I'm the Independent Community Campaigner for Liverpool. I'd like to welcome you to this inaugural Community Information Night to discuss the Religious Discrimination Bill. I think this is a subject that has been of utmost concern to us for over 12 months now, and I've brought to you who I think are four excellent speakers who have expert knowledge in the area of this legislation, who have been there from the beginning, and I'll introduce them as they come up. In the meantime though, if we could just have a little bit of housekeeping. So first things first, if you have a mobile phone, I would ask you to either turn it off, turn it to silent. That would be greatly appreciated. If you need to use the toilets, they're just out the door and across the hall, very close by. And I'd like to, again, thank you all for arriving and being early and on time. So just a quick question, who here is from Liverpool? And who isn't? Okay, about 2/3 and 1/3, good to know. Who here has heard of the Israel Folau case? Okay, pretty well everyone, but I won't even ask who hasn't. And who here wants to know more about the Religious Discrimination Bill?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And who wouldn't put their hand up no matter what I asked? Thank you. Well, you're in the right place. So, as I've said, my name's Michael Andjelkovic. I'm the Independent Community Campaigner for Liverpool. Just by a show of hands, who here has seen or heard of me? Okay, a few of you. 5 seconds on Channel 9 News doesn't make you famous. But, tonight we're going to go through in a fair bit of detail. Well, we're going to go through a complex issue in a short amount of detail. It's something that I've been learning about. I've attended many forums, many conferences, gone through and read through a number of briefs and submissions. And tonight we're going to condense probably about a year's worth of information into 90 minutes, if we can. It'll be short and concise. I do have a Liberal senator here. I have had a question, why haven't you invited the Labor Party? Well, Dr. Con and I have been to see the federal Labor member. 3 of the other speakers have attended meetings here with the Labor Party, and the current Labor Party position is that before the bill is tabled, they have no position, so hence they're not here. First speaker for tonight is Dr. Kafataris. Dr. Kafataris, I first met him at a Fairfield rally that he held at Fairfield Station, where Mark Latham was a speaker on the Religious Discrimination Bill at the state level. I then found out about another event he was holding, which was the Mount Druitt rally, and attended that. And then he held another third rally and function in Rockdale. And at that rally, after the third time, he looked at me sideways, and I thought, well, I better go and introduce myself because I want to show him that I'm a supporter, not a stalker.
That's true.
So, Dr. Con is a really informative guy, and I think the best part is he reads information, he reads documents that would make most other people's heads explode. So he's the guy that's actually gone through and analysed the Labor Party manifesto. He's gone through and read the discrimination legislation. He's gone through and prepared submissions, etc. A committed Christian and the founder of the Australian Christian Alliance. It was because of Dr. Kafataris that there's a number of multi-faith leaders that got together. He's the one that kicked down the door to Scott Morrison, the PM, and
Not just me.
not just, yeah, but he was an instigator. So, and from there, that's why version 1 of the legislation was canned and version 2 has now been put up in draft, and we're waiting for version 3 to be tabled in Parliament. So without further ado, I'd like you to give a warm Liverpool welcome to Dr. Kafataris.
See, we're not supposed to shake hands, but I don't care, right? I'm looked after there. Gee, after that introduction, I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say either. So, look, what I'd like to do, and thank you, Michael, for that, and you know, just to correct a couple of, well, not correct, but just to clarify, it wasn't just me that's been involved with the meetings with the politicians. There've been some other people that have been involved. Some of them are here tonight. So it's been really a group effort and a collaborative effort, and what shows what can be done when you know, faiths get together to talk about what unites them rather than what divides them. So what I want to do in my time is to give you basically some historical context. So, in other words, how do we get here? Then I'd like to give you some fundamentals of why we have a problem and why we need to do something. Now, while religious freedom has been in the news over the last 12 months or so, especially after the election, the process has actually begun several years before. Now here I'm going to steal Connie's thunder, because she loves saying this, but I'm going to quote the Honourable Senator Concetta Wells. The issue had, quote, its antecedents in the same-sex marriage debate in 2016-2017. Okay, and she's right, because at that time, okay, we were all told there'd be no consequences. There'd be no consequences to religious freedom. Okay, and that if it was same-sex marriage was legalised without adequate protection, the politicians were warned that there would be consequences. As it turned out, a majority of people voted yes, but nearly 5 million people voted no, most of them on religious grounds, and many of them in ALP or marginal seats. Now, even though those seats had strong no votes, some of them as high as 2/3, 70% almost, the majority of the MPs representing those people supported same-sex marriage. So in other words, the electorates voted no, the MPs voted yes. And so those people thought that they were ignored and misrepresented. Now, only a fool would have thought you could totally ignore the concerns of millions of Australians and there'd be no consequences. Okay? That's really silly to think you can just whitewash all that and there's no consequences. Now, even though some MPs tried to move amendments to protect religious freedom, okay, and credit to those MPs that did, the leaders of both major parties chose to ignore those warnings, and the legislation was rushed through with the concerns of these people ignored. The then Prime Minister Turnbull then commissioned the Ruddock Report, okay, it's the expert committee to look at that. That committee received 16,000 submissions. I think the most of any such committee, and Connie can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was a record number of submissions. It shows how strongly people felt about this issue. Then the Ruddock Report was given to the government in May of 2018. It showed there were holes in people's religious freedom. They made 20 recommendations. Okay. Now the problem was that the report was not made public. They sat on it. When it was finally leaked in October 2018, did we actually get a debate on religious freedom? No. We got another debate on gay rights. Okay. We had people saying that religious schools wanted to expel gay students, even though there was no evidence whatsoever that this was actually happening. That led to the Penny Wong Bill, which would have looked to remove the only protections that religious schools have to maintain their ethos. Now, the problem with that bill is it would have removed way more than just, it would have affected way more than just schools. It would have affected churches, mosques, synagogues, etc. The bill was defeated, but religious Australians had been woken up to the threat that was coming. Then in April of last year, everybody remembers, I mean, Michael mentioned him, Israel Folau. Okay, he gets sacked. Now what does he do? He gets sacked for quoting 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9, 10 and 11. He gets sacked for quoting the Bible. Okay. Now whether you agree with the scriptures or not is not the point. The Bible is the Bible. And so people were starting to think, am I going to be the next Folau? Am I going to be sacked for quoting my scriptures? Okay, very good question. Following that, we had Labor losing the unlosable election in May 2019. I've even heard stories that, and I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I heard stories that Bill Shorten had actually packed all his belongings to move into the lodge, right? And they lost. One of the key issues in many seats, especially out here, was religious freedom. The media didn't pick up on it a whole lot, but it was definitely a key issue in a lot of seats, and it led to swings of nearly 8% against the ALP. Okay? Now, the ABC actually ran a story on that. They did a story of the migrants in Fairfield and Mount Druitt who were voting for One Nation. Now think about this. In Fairfield and Mount Druitt, you have people that come from Asia and the Middle East, right? And many of those people from the Middle East are Muslim, right? And yet here you've got people from Asia and the Middle East voting for a party whose leader said 3 decades ago, we're in danger of being swamped by Asians. And then 2 decades ago, she says, we're in danger of being swamped by Muslims. And yet Asians and Muslims voted for her party. Why is that? Okay, good question, isn't it? Well, the answer, I believe, is that they felt that her party would do a better job of protecting their religious freedom than the majors. And I talk to people from the Middle East all the time, and last night I met with our good friend Rashana Salah here, and all the people tell me something very similar. They come from countries where they've been persecuted for their religion. They come to Australia and they see that the same thing's happening here, except it's not by the sword like it was over there, it's now by the law. So we've had the warfare go to lawfare. All right? Is it any wonder that they voted the way they did? That brings us to the present, where we had the Morrison government presenting us with an exposure draft on the Religious Discrimination Act. And I'm not going to talk about that in any great detail. I'm going to leave it to my esteemed colleague to do that. I want to now talk about some fundamentals. Okay, so in other words, we throw these words around, religious freedom, and some people say, well, why is it a big deal? So let's go back to the fundamentals. Religious freedom deals with the fundamentals of freedom, because you can't have true freedom unless you have the freedom to act, correct? Okay, but your actions come from your thoughts, and your thoughts come from your beliefs. So without freedom of belief, you have no freedom. For a religious person, their freedom comes from their religion. So can everybody see that without freedom of religion, you actually don't have freedom? Follow that? Yeah, please let me know, because otherwise I don't want to make it if I've lost anyone. Also, religious freedom deals with the fundamentals of identity. I mean, who's heard the term identity politics? And inclusion, right? We have to have inclusion, we have to be inclusive. Well, for a religious person, their religion determines their identity. It determines who they are, correct? Okay? Well, what about our inclusion? Okay? What about my inclusion? Okay? We're talking about including all these different groups and all these different minorities. What about including the people of religious faith? Okay? You also have some fundamentals of rights, because basically, and I'm not going to get into any legalese here, but there's a positive right and then there's a negative right. Positive right is what you can do. The negative right is sort of what can't be done to you. Now, discrimination, for example, same-sex marriage is an example of a positive right. Discrimination laws are generally speaking a negative right. Now, when you've got two opposing forces colliding, okay, now the lawyers in the room can correct me later, that was fine, but when you've got two opposing forces colliding, who usually wins? The weaker one or the stronger one?
The noisiest.
Sorry?
The noisiest.
Okay, but in a fight, who usually wins? The stronger or the weaker? The stronger. In a war, who wins? The side with the bigger guns. All right? So when you've got a conflict of rights, the stronger right will win. Positive rights in general outweigh negative rights. Okay? So this leads us to a fundamental conflict. Okay? Because what the government has done, it's given a positive right for one group of people to practice something, such as same-sex marriage, okay, that the holy scriptures of the world's two largest religions call an abomination. All right? Together, Christianity and Islam, and Judaism, there are about 4.5 billion people across the world. Now, am I the only one who sees a problem here? Okay? Because whether or not you agree with those scriptures, they define the identity for many practicing Jews, Muslims, and Christians. So the question for those people is, do they have the positive right to proclaim what the scriptures say? Okay? Even if it's offensive to some people. Now, that's why it shouldn't be a surprise to you that many Christians and Muslims actually funded Israel Folaw's legal fees. I know of one community, okay, one Muslim community that gave 70,000 to that GoFundMe page. All right. So let's talk about some fundamental politics. I'm not a politician, so I'm not going to get into the politics, but I just want to say some basic things. Effectively, neither side wants a public drawn-out public debate like same-sex marriage. They want bipartisan support, and they want to get this through ASAP. But there's a fundamental problem, okay? The major parties cannot satisfy both the LGBT lobby and conservative religious people at the same time, because the demands are mutually exclusive. One wants black, the other wants white. Giving them a shade of grey isn't going to make either of them happy. You follow that? Okay. So what we've got now is what the MPs, okay, of either stripe. You've got religious people like me yelling in their ear, saying, give me robust protection for my religious freedom. And you've got the LGBT lobby saying, we don't want you to give those guys protection for their religious freedom. Okay? So you've got this conflict. And I'd like you to give you the words of Jesus regarding that. Jesus in Luke chapter 16 said, no servant can serve two masters, for either will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. And that explains why recently, and I don't mind if I talk out of school here, but recently I know for a fact that one Muslim leader told ALP MPs that words to the effect, you care more about gays and lesbians than you do about our community. He said, you're going to have to choose. You're either going to look after them or you're going to look after our community. Now, you might think, wow, that's pretty hardcore. Well, I actually love that about them. They're hardcore about their beliefs. Okay? Now, all of us should be hardcore about our beliefs. I put it to you, you don't have to believe what I believe. Believe something and stand up for what you believe in. Don't let other people railroad your freedom and railroad your beliefs. So, basically what we've now is that the politicians of both sides are between a rock and a hard place. It's a far more fundamental problem for the government to solve, and they're literally going to have to unscramble the egg. Okay. I'm going to finish now. I'm going to suggest we need to get back to basics of a civil society. We need to avoid, we need to get away from this idea that we have a right to be offended. Okay, we basically, newsflash everybody, people will offend you and people will insult you. So I want to leave you with something, the way that I put it to a number of people, and I've actually put it to a politician in this respect. We need to get back to recognise and accept that that I have that even though the government has legalised something that I may see as objectionable, I recognise and accept the rights of same-sex couples to do that. In the same way, they need to recognise and accept the right of me and other religious people to say that our scriptures forbid something like that. So we all basically need to get back to what Jesus said. Whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. It goes back to simple respect. We need to respect each other's rights to hold different views, even if we radically disagree with them. Thank you very much.